All right, we are officially recording. Yep, okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Paige. I am a registered dietitian here at Boston Medical Center. Um, and I get to teach this class, WellSense Health Plan, and I also teach a couple other remote classes for Boston. And today's recipe is a asparagus stem pesto with fettuccine noodles. And we're also going to make a fun berry mocktail. If you're not familiar with what a mocktail is, it's supposed to be like a cocktail without alcohol. Sometimes people call them like a spritz or just a non-alcoholic fun drink. I thought it would be perfect to introduce the warmer weather we have coming up. When I planned this recipe, I was just hoping and crossing my fingers that it was going to be beautiful outside, and the weather did not disappoint. It's a perfect day. Asparagus season is coming up, as well as berry season, all of those wonderful things to look forward to as we approach the warmer weather. This is one of my new favorite recipes because oftentimes when I buy produce, there are pieces of the produce that I have to get rid of or compost. I try to compost sometimes, it's just not realistic with where I live. But when you can incorporate the whole piece of food, it's amazing because we're limiting waste, we're getting more bang for our buck, and we're also incorporating more nutrition by using more of the plant, more of the nutritious piece of food, right? So this is a really cool recipe. And I actually did a couple pieces of the recipe before we started. I went ahead and I sliced my asparagus and I blanched the stems. So typically this is what I would have thrown away. Got some garlic in there. I would have thrown this away. Your stems are usually a little bit more woody, a little bit more fibrous. So most people tend to find the asparagus, grab it, and kind of let it snap itself. And it'll tell you what's more tender and what tends to be a little bit more fibrous and firm. People throw those away or give them to their furry or feathery friends outside. This recipe is amazing because it's very sustainable, and we're just taking these stems and we are boiling them. We're gonna strain them, and you can see that I can pierce it with my nail. Very, very easy.
Amy.
Very, very soft. And that's important to do before you make your pesto because we want our pesto to be able to blend evenly. So that's just super important of why we are doing that. I'm just
And Zoom
checking.
later?
There we go. I just had to mute a couple folks. Really, really helpful to help blend evenly because when we make our pesto, we want a nice even sauce. So we're going to go ahead and start with making our pesto. I just got to make sure I have my recipe pulled up in the background for reference. What I have here, and again, you'll have to, I apologize for any adjustments to the camera as I navigate all of the tools I have in front of me here and working with my tripod. But here I have a food processor. Traditionally, pesto is part of Italian cuisine, and they used to make it obviously without this, but grinding it up with something like a stone and would grind it like that. This is obviously just significantly faster, and we live in a world that things like this are a lot more easily accessible. So that's what I'm going to make with my pesto. What we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and add our stems. Asparagus stems are super nutritious, full of lots of nutrients, lots of fiber. They're a non-starchy veggie, so they're lower in carbohydrates and calories. Lots of really great vitamins and minerals in here, and these are really wonderful to fill up on. We want half of our plate to be fruits and veggies, specifically non-starchy veggies. So if we can not only add asparagus to our pasta meal, but add some more non-starchy veggies in the actual sauce, we're getting even more nutrition, which is awesome. Again, we're going to go ahead and take our basil, and we're going to be sustainable. So instead of just picking off the leaves, which I do anytime I have a recipe with basil, oops, I dropped a leaf. We're going to actually just throw this whole thing in here, stems and all, because why not? We're going to blend it up. You're not going to notice it. So we're just going to toss the whole thing in there. There you go. I can see that a little better. We're going to go ahead and add, I'm going to do 3 cloves of garlic. I like garlic. We're going to add some salt. oops, missed that a little bit. Salt, we needed some grated Parmesan. I'm gonna go ahead and grate some in here. I like to measure with my heart when it comes to cheese. All right, we need our lemon juice, about 2 tablespoons. About a cup of fresh baby spinach. Go ahead and toss that guy in there. We need a little bit of salt, a little bit of black pepper. We need about 1/4 cup of olive oil. If you'd prefer to measure it out beforehand, you can. I'm pretty good at eyeballing at this point. All right. And we're gonna go ahead and add a little bit of water, just to give it some extra liquid. I'm gonna mute my camera while I turn this on so it's not really, really loud. So I'm gonna go ahead and start blending.
It's a ninja thing. I need that. This is that BMC wellness picture. Almost
Oh, a couple of my spinach leaves didn't make it down in there. That's all right. I'll put the top black on and blend it real quick. If you don't have access to a food processor, a blender works just fine. All right, perfect. Here is our beautiful sauce. Now, if you would want to thicken this up or, I'm sorry, make it a little more watery, I should say, allow it to be less thick. You can add more water or add more oil to disperse it, but I think this is a perfect consistency. I'm gonna go ahead and set this to the side. We will go ahead and move on to the next part of the recipe. You could even make that, I would say maybe 2 days in the fridge it would last. You could make that ahead of time. I think this would be delicious on just fresh vegetables, not pasta obviously would be delicious, but you could even do just, as a sauce for some fresh vegetables. I bet it would even be delicious as almost like a salad dressing. I'm gonna go ahead and turn on my skillet. We're gonna do some rearranging. Okay, spinach there. Okay. All right, everyone can see that. Is anyone cooking along with me today or are we watching?
Today I'm watching.
Awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. I think for me, if I was watching a cooking class, I would want to watch and then do later so I can focus on learning. Because I think for me, if I multitask, I get distracted. We have some folks cooking with us. Yay. Oh, I have another question in the chat here. What are your thoughts on using a salt substitute instead of salt? That is a really great question. So I would say if you are someone who is required to reduce their sodium intake and you need to look at ways to do that, a salt substitute is one of them. But I will tell you, they are not necessarily, the taste is not the same. It's supposed to kind of provoke the same type of response in your mouth. But for example, I love salty things. I am like a salt addict, which is not good, but I also am a very heavy sweater. I exercise a lot, so I'm very aware of my sodium intake. I have tried salt substitutes. They can be tricky to learn. So if you are trying to reduce your sodium, I would say let's try to see how we can make salt work in our diet. And if we need to use salt substitutes, we can. So what I mean by that is this recipe, when we made our pesto, right? I added a little tiny bit of salt. Say the recipe called for 1 teaspoon, maybe start out with 1/4 of a teaspoon. Whenever you make your recipe, go through the whole thing, and then at the very end say, okay, you know what, maybe I need some salt on my meal. Don't worry so much about salting as you cook. Maybe just salt it at the very end so the salt granules are very exposed for your mouth to taste without actually hiding all that salt in the meal. And think of it this way. When you get canned vegetables or canned beans, there's usually a lot of sodium in there. We don't always necessarily detect that on our tongue. I've never noticed a difference between normal canned green beans and low to no salt green beans canned, and if I rinse them with some water. I only notice if I add salt on top of them right before I eat them. So that is a good way for you to try to reduce it while you're cooking, and maybe try to explore with some substitutes if you want to try that. But there's also other ways, you know, instead of just using an actual salt substitute, you can use fresh herbs and spices that have no sodium, but have lots of flavor. Because salt is a flavor enhancer, it's not necessarily adding flavor. So when you salt your asparagus, we're really enhancing the flavor of the asparagus. We're not necessarily adding, you know, I think sage always adds like very like warm flavors and really like an added layer of depth to whatever it's complementing. Like I think sage pairs very well with like sage butter noodles, right? I think the sage pairs very well with the noodles. So there are ways for you to kind of work with non-sodium options to also add more flavor. So that was my long answer. Long story short, just because you need to cut back on your sodium does not mean salt substitutes are the only answer. We can kind of reduce when we cook, and we can add as needed, and we can also try those other sources of flavor that we might be craving from what we get from salt. So I went ahead and I cut up my asparagus stems here, and I'm gonna actually pull back this tripod because if it's too close to when I cook, the steam will just shoot right up. So we're just gonna have it back at an angle there. I went ahead and I cut the asparagus into about 1-inch pieces here. And I'm gonna go ahead, and again, I said I'm gonna roll this recipe without my mushrooms. If you have mushrooms, amazing, they're delicious, add them. And that's the beauty of cooking, is adapting it to what you can do and what you have on hand. So if you saw this recipe and thought, I wanna make it and I have asparagus, great, make it with asparagus. If you don't have any cauliflower, no worries. Try it with broccoli. You can kind of adapt it here. I also was told by a friend who has made pesto with broccoli stems. So you could try to make this substitution instead of asparagus using broccoli. So you can always play around with things. We're gonna go ahead and saute these. I added a little bit of avocado oil to my pan because I'm cooking at a higher heat. I honestly hate mincing garlic, so I am just gonna substitute it for some garlic powder. And since I have some fresh garlic in my pesto, no worries. You can always substitute something like minced garlic for powdered garlic, especially when you're cooking with oil and cooking over heat. That heat really activates the flavors in the powder, especially when combined with the oil. Looks like I need to add a little bit more.
Excuse me, Paige, would I be able to add something?
Yeah, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I was thinking, going back to your question you got about salt substitution, I had noticed that you have basil and spinach in your recipe, both of which I believe have anti-inflammatory properties. I know turmeric powder has a lot of properties, and it's pretty flavorful. I think that might be a good addition to
Yeah.
maybe add on, whether as a substitution or just to include anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, anything that has, I think, like you said, more of like a strong flavor, like turmeric or even ginger. I think those strong flavors really give us what we're craving in our palate. Again, salt is really hard to replace and salty things are delicious. Our brain just tells us that we love those flavors. Some people just aren't really like into salty things, which is totally fine, but our brain loves salt.
Right.
So you said all of those other very nutritious options that add flavor. Yeah, those are great options.
Sweet. Yeah. Awesome.
Great suggestion. I think turmeric would actually pair really nicely with this. I have powdered turmeric, and every time I cook with powdered turmeric, it stains my hands, it stains my dishes. I suffer the consequences. It's fine, but I would be curious. I have not gotten fresh turmeric in a long time, so I'd be curious if that might be a little bit more friendly to cook with, especially because my cookware is white. But yeah, I know
Definitely.
I have like pre-minced ginger. I was gonna say garlic, pre-minced ginger, any of those things. There's really not a bad herb or spice if you like it to add. So yeah, really,
Certainly.
thank you.
And
That
just to add one last thing, yeah, about the turmeric. Yeah, I know, the pain you feel with the powder, how it stains everything, but just to let you know, the actual turmeric itself, it doesn't stain as much, so might be the way to go.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. That is definitely something I should try because I get very discouraged when I cook with it. Again, I just suffer the consequences, but it just makes cleanup a hassle. Thank you.
Of course, of course.
All right. Letting that guy get all heated up. And because I didn't use fresh garlic in the instructions there, it tells you to be mindful to not burn your garlic. When you're cooking with garlic, and this is something I actually have recently learned, so I'll share with you in case you haven't been aware of this. Garlic burns very quickly, burns a lot quicker than something like onions. So if your recipe calls for onion and to saute vegetables, always add your garlic towards the end of the sauteing because your garlic will burn very quickly. My whole life, I had always added the garlic and the onion at the same time, and I always was like, oh no, they're burning. And I was like, well, it's fine, just flavor. I recently realized that they just cook at a quicker temperature. They cook quicker, so they'll burn faster. So that's why you should add them later. I cooked with the powder today, so I don't have to worry about that. But for those of you cooking at home, just be mindful that the garlic is supposed to come in later for a reason. I'm gonna go ahead and add my cauliflower. And we're gonna get a nice sear here, hopefully. I might add my lid back on there. My induction burner I have plugged in sometimes. The heat is not overly consistent, so we'll see how this goes. And I have my fettuccine noodles already made. And if you're cooking with us or, if you're cooking at home later and you have your mushrooms, mushrooms are such a magical food, I think, when it comes to applying heat and cooking them, because this really cool thing happens when they brown and they caramelize on the outside. They really, really, truly develop this wonderful flavor called umami, which things like soy sauce are what we would consider like umami. It's like a savory, salty, really yummy flavor. Mushrooms are really, I think, underlooked because oftentimes, if they're not cooked the full way to allow them to really develop that umami flavor, they might not be as, flavorful. Just like if you're gonna make steak, right? If you make steak and you don't get a nice sear on the outside, it's still a good meal. But when you have a steak that's really nicely seared on the outside, the flavor is just heightened significantly. And it's because of that heat contact with the outer layer. And this wonderful thing in chemistry happens where like the carbs and the proteins on the surface interact and create just like a really yummy flavor. Long story short. So the same thing happens with mushrooms. It also happens with vegetables. When we cook them long enough to allow them to kind of break down and caramelize per se, they really truly have such a yummy flavor. And again, adding whatever, oh, my heat kind of went down there. Adding whatever fresh herbs, dried herbs, any of that, whatever you love will definitely add more flavor as well. Okay, let me just check the chat here. I love to see we have some folks cooking. If you are cooking along and you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. Like I said, I made the pasta before and I had already blanched or pre-boiled my asparagus stems, so I might be a little bit ahead of you. So please feel free to call out if you have any questions. Could you make the pesto using peas? I think you could. I definitely think you could. If you would replace the asparagus, I think you totally could. I don't know. They're a bit more, so they're what we would call a starchy vegetable. I don't know if the texture might be a thicker texture because of it's more of a starchy inside versus the asparagus is a little bit more water-based. But I think you could totally do that. You could honestly even add peas in there with it. And traditional pesto is made with pine nuts in the actual pesto, whereas this one can be a lot more friendly for those who have nut or seed allergies. And maybe this could be considered more of a lighter pesto. And I say that cautiously because I'm actually going to be garnishing with some pine nuts, so I am going to be adding them at the end. But pine nuts are a heavy source of heart healthy fats, and they're a little bit more calorie dense. So they will add more calories, which is not a bad thing, but you can make a lighter, lower calorie sauce without incorporating the pine nuts, but still have lots of flavor. You should still also, if you love normal pesto with the pine nuts, still just as delicious with the pine nuts. But it's interesting that I personally don't feel like the pine nuts that are missing in the pesto change it whole too much. Like it's still really delicious. All right, here we go. Now we're back up to temp. We'll give her a good. Make sure it's on there completely. Add a little bit more oil. So right now, if I wanted to, I would have maybe salted this, but if you don't want to add extra sodium, I would not add any sodium or any salt this whole time while I'm cooking, and I would add it at the very end over my plate. And that has benefits because one, again, like I said, those granules of salt are going to be more readily accessible to your tongue, so it'll taste salty. But again, say you're cooking for your family, you're allowing them to choose their own saltiness. If I was cooking, you know, for folks who needed to watch their sodium, I would then allow them the opportunity to either lightly salt it as they need, and I can salt how I want without making them feel like they can't enjoy the dish as well. Let me just check the chat. Please send name of ingredients. I will go ahead and I will put the links to the recipes in the chat again. And this is one of our partners, the website that these recipes are on. And a wonderful thing about this is that there's an option to have these recipes directly Instacarted to your house, which in a pinch and you don't want to go to the grocery store, really nice and convenient to have. But these are just really wonderful recipes that I love to cook. King oyster mushrooms are the best, just so hard to find in stores. Yeah, mushrooms can be a little tricky. Their availability at times, and they can be a little bit more expensive, but they are delicious and very nutritious. And I think they really always add that really lovely umami
You need
flavor.
something?
No.
Oh, do we have a question? No? Okay. No worries. Sometimes we get unmuted and that's fine. Okay. It might be hard to see, but my cauliflower is getting some nice color to it. My pan is definitely overcrowded, which is why things aren't browning as quickly. If you want things to brown quickly and evenly, you don't want to overcrowd your pan. For the sake of learning, I often try to make mistakes, or I often try to do things as I would and just talk a little bit about what's happening and why it's happening. Because the reality is we all have very busy lives. We all don't have hours every day to cook. And if we did, we probably wouldn't want to spend hours every day cooking. So sometimes whatever can make things quick, easy, and delicious is what most of us want, right? So I wanted lots of veggies, so I am crowding them in here because I want to have a lot of veggies for my meal. I want lots of nutrition and fiber. But I'm still gonna get lots of delicious flavor. I'm lucky I have the NH Mushroom Company 1 town away. Yeah, and I bet you get really nice mushrooms there. Probably lots of those, like the king oyster ones. Okay. Yeah, see, here we go. See this beautiful color? That's delicious. I love that. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna add my sauce. Oops, kicking my tripod around. This smells delicious. The fresh basil smell is amazing. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and put my lid over this so that way my vegetables got flavor because they got that seared, that caramelization, but now I want them to soften. Right. And I'm actually gonna let that soften a little bit more, and I have my pasta here. I'll pop that in a second. Anyone have any questions so far? Are my home cooks doing okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome. I hope you're as excited to eat this for dinner as I am. I've made this 3 times in the past 2 weeks, which I'm not a creature of habit, so that should tell you this has definitely been a fun recipe. And I think it's really cool that I could use the whole piece of asparagus. I never would have thought to do that.
Alternative sauce, some alternative sauces you may use if you're not a fan of pesto.
I'm sorry, what was that?
What are some alternative sauces you can use for a dish like this if you're not a fan of pesto?
Is there a certain ingredient in the pesto that you don't like, or just completely a different sauce?
I'm just not a fan of pesto. I know depending on, if you make it from scratch, I don't think I've ever had it from scratch, but depending on where you buy it, how you buy it, it can taste different, but I've never really been a fan of pesto.
Yeah, that's totally fine. You could even use like a red sauce. You could use a marinara sauce. You could even do like saute your asparagus and cauliflower, and you could toss them in like some lemon juice and olive oil and garlic, and fresh herbs. I think traditional pesto, definitely depending where you buy it, can have different flavors that might not be as inviting. But I think you could take elements of this and you could apply it. Like traditionally pesto has pine nuts, and like I said, this one doesn't necessarily have pine nuts. I'm gonna give a little bit more oil here. My noodles got a little stuck together. Have pine nuts. You can honestly probably use any sauce. You can even do like an Alfredo. I've wanted to try making Alfredo with steamed cauliflower. I think that would be cool. Instead of using like, the boiled asparagus in a sauce, doing like a steamed cauliflower, that would be really cool. You can't really go wrong. You could use the whole head of the cauliflower, so we would limit waste as well. Gonna let that kind of soak up the juice.
Is there a sauce that's not called pesto, but it tastes similar to it? I was trying to figure out how to switch without like too much altering the taste, like a cousin of pesto.
I'm not sure of one. Maybe someone else in the chat has some suggestions for her. Just have a lot of garlic in it. I don't know one off the top of my head, but maybe someone could brainstorm and has some suggestions and would want to throw it in the chat. This is my first time honestly making pesto, and I don't think I've ever bought it from the store. I've had like pesto, but it never seemed like I love Alfredo sauce, so I make that all the time. I've never really made pesto, but I like this because I think it's very light and flavorful, and I love basil. But I don't know how often I would be making traditional pesto if I wasn't making a dish similar to this. So I totally understand what you're saying there. There are elements of pesto that I myself don't love, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would be a cousin of it. But maybe,
If I could,
oh, go ahead, yeah.
if I could put my head in, I was thinking maybe basil vinaigrette would be the closest thing.
That's perfect. What do you think of that? Do you think that might be something you would like a vinaigrette with basil?
I mean, I'm open to trying that. I've never tasted it. I'll look it up. Thank you.
That's a great
Yeah,
suggestion.
no problem.
Thank you. See, perfect. All right, we're gonna let that warm up a little bit. We will add some lemon juice, top with some cheese because we always need cheese, and some pine nuts. And then we're gonna make our mocktail. Someone in the chat said, if you like basil, maybe it's the pine nuts. You could try making it with walnuts if you like walnuts instead of the pine nuts. Or it could be the raw garlic, which can be strong, and you can roast it first. Also great suggestions. The vinaigrette idea was a perfect suggestion. Thank you so much for that.
Anytime, no problem.
I think this is at a good place here. Oh, looks beautiful. Now, I wasn't going to include this as part of my demo for tonight, just because I already have a lot going on with the pesto and we're making a mocktail. But serving this for dinner, I would, to make this meal a bit more balanced, to give me some more protein and to help me feel fuller longer and give my body the protein that it needs to recover, repair, all of that stuff that we need for our body from protein. I would either add some beans, add some white beans, chickpeas. You could even kind of add your chickpeas in the beginning to get them like nice and toasty and caramelized and browned on the sides. You could do some chicken, some shrimp would be amazing. You could even do some tofu. Honestly, any protein source that you would like. If you were in a pinch and say you wanted to meal prep this for the week, my tip to you would be to utilize those high protein noodles. And you could even eat this as a cold salad if you don't like cold protein. There are lots of ways to amp up the protein to make this more of a balanced meal. Because right now I just used normal enriched white noodles. But for the sake of the demo, I just didn't include that. I was going to run out of counter space. I always measure cheese with my heart. Gonna add some pine nuts for some texture, some heart-healthy fats, and a beautiful garnish. You could even toast your pine nuts as well. Try your pine nuts. You might need to snack on them while you're cooking. Make sure they're, safe to consume. I always say that when I'm snacking while I eat. Just gotta test it, make sure it's safe. All right, added a little bit of lemon juice. Looks beautiful. I turned my heat source off. I'm gonna put my lid back on. Let's make a mocktail. It's berry season. We need a beautiful mocktail. Ooh, and I need to get a pretty glass for sure with my mocktail. This is a fun cup. We'll use this cup. Okay. First things first, we have berries. Frozen berries are fine. If you have frozen berries, I suggest warming them in the microwave a little bit so they are easily muddled. I bought berries last week, and my berries, you know, when your berries are on the last legs of their life, they get a little squishy. These are a little squishy. I don't know if I'd pop these in my mouth to eat them. They're not moldy, so they are the perfect candidate for muddling. They have lots of delicious juice and flavor. Just the texture might be a little funny to eat. I have some blackberries. I have some red raspberries and some blueberries. I'm going to go ahead and put into this little tiny jar. I do not have a real muddler, so I'm going to be using the end of a butter knife, and it is a very dull butter knife. So if you are using something like a butter knife, just be mindful that there is still a little of a bit of a serrated edge. So just be safe. I have some beautiful berries in there. I'm going to get muddling. And I'm just going to squish them around. I think I need more red raspberries. Thought I grabbed more in my cup, but I didn't. I hope you're all inspired to make yourself a delicious drink tonight. I love mocktails or spritzes, or just a fun drink by using fruit as a natural sweetener. And we're also, you know, adding some nutrition to whether you're using a carbonated, sparkling water or plain water, we're adding some nutrition. We're adding, you know, some trace minerals and vitamins into our drink by infusing it with the juice of these berries. All right, looks good. I have a shaker glass here. I am going to grab a spoon. Oops. I'm going to go ahead and put my muddled berries in here. I have some honey simple syrup. I'm going to take a couple spoonfuls of this. I just added some water and honey to a saucepan, let it come to a boil, which is really nice because for cold drinks, honey never mixes well. So when you make it into a simple syrup, you can add into a cold drink, no problem. I am going to put some lemon juice in this as well. And I'm going to grab some ice for our drink. All right. Ice for my cup, ice in my sugar glass. I am one of those people that needs their drink to be ice cold. It either needs to be hot, hot or cold, cold for me. I'm going to add a little bit of my bubbly to give it some more liquid ratio so I can shake it in my glass. I'm just checking the chat real quick. I devour that. This dish looks so good. Yeah, this is a really great way to, especially if you have little kiddos or say you're someone that loves a sweet carbonated beverage, using, you know, berries as a natural sweetener. And it's a fun thing to do. If you're someone who habitually has a cocktail or maybe has an alcoholic beverage, sometimes it's all about the habit of having the drink. So sometimes, you know, going through the motions of muddling the berries and using a shaker glass can kind of give you that ease of mind of like, okay, I'm still going through my ritual of making a cocktail or having a drink, but maybe just not having the alcohol with it. You very easily could add alcohol to this if that's something that you would like, but I'm all about let's hydrate. We want some delicious flavor. So I'm going to shake this guy up. Just shaking it up to mix everything together. If you don't mind the texture of the berries, you could totally just muddle this and have everything in here together. I'm going to see the best way to go about doing this. There we go. Like, I don't really mind the texture. And I didn't pour the whole thing of bubbly into this, just a little bit to allow everything to be shaken up and muddled. Because it is carbonated, so the pressure will build and we might lose the bubbles. So this is kind of all my residual in the ice. You could totally drink that if you don't mind the texture. Just, it's the fibrous part of the berries. But I just wanted the juice. And I have a little bit of the some of the seeds that escaped through, which is no problem to me. I do not mind that. Got a straw here. This is such a fun thing too. If you have kiddos or you're having guests over. Very fun way to enjoy an elevated drink. And this is a beautiful color. All right, now time for our garnish, because what's a mocktail without a fun garnish? I have some strawberries here. I'm gonna add a strawberry to the rim. And oh no, where did over here. Recipe is for rosemary, but I didn't have rosemary, so I'm gonna use thyme. That kind of looks too long. No, that looks fine. I think that looks very pretty. All right, what do we think? Beautiful, right?
Yes.
So fun. I used a cherry bubbly. You could use a plain bubbly. You could use tap water. You could use whatever you would like. This drink is lower in added sugars. We used a little bit of simple syrup from the honey simple syrup. But we are relying on the flavors of the berries and their natural sweetness here.
Ew.
I'm just missing the little umbrella. I am. That would be a fun addition to this for sure. All right, so now we definitely need to plate our pasta. I wish I could invite you all over for dinner because I always end up with way too much food after class. Looks beautiful. We have a beautiful summery spring meal here. Oh my gosh, I just lost a cauliflower. Beautiful. Very veggie filled meal. I think this would be really yummy with some scallops or some shrimp. Like I said before, while we were cooking, adding your salt at the end, adding some fresh cracked pepper, a little bit of salt. All right. Now it's time for the taste test. We can't do a cooking demo without a taste test. Anyone cooking at home get to the point where they can do their taste test?
Why did you say add the salt at the end again?
So I usually add the salt at the end because sometimes when you're cooking, recipes can be made to taste delicious and sometimes they just have a lot of salt in them. And for me, I like to add it at the end because I am going to taste that directly on my tongue because the salt granules are sitting there versus being immersed in a sauce or immersed in everything else. I personally do not watch my sodium. I'm mindful of it. I try to take steps to try not to consume it in excessive amounts because it's very easy to, especially if you would eat a diet high in processed foods. But I think just habitually, I really enjoy putting salt and pepper on my food right before I eat. So in order for me to actually taste my salt, I try not to use it as much when I'm cooking with it and just do it at the end because I can even see the little salt granules on my food right now. But that's totally per personal preference. Delicious. I better check the chat. We have a lot of comments in here. What a wonderful dish and mocktail. Oh, thank you. Oh, awesome. Yay, lots of feedback. Catherine says she's almost there. She's proud she could keep up with me. I'm proud of you too. Great work. You're going to have a delicious reward when you're all done. Oh, awesome. Everyone is enjoying this recipe so much. I am so excited. And this is really delicious. And I better try my mocktail, so. I love fresh berries. That is delicious. Such a spring meal, and I'm ready for it with this warm spring day. This is perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording. So if anyone has any questions they want to ask off camera, I'm gonna go ahead and end it now.
If this mocktail were to be turned cocktail, what alcohol would you recommend to use?
Great question. You could do like some vodka. I think a white rum would go well. You could
Oh, there's
probably,
something. Who knows?
yeah, you could use like a coconut rum.
Coconut rum. Mm.
I even think for just the mocktail without the alcohol, this would be delicious with some coconut water to add some
Ooh,
electrolytes
even
and
better
add a little
suggestion.
coconut flavor. Yeah, great question.
Do you think they-
Everybody's popping some stuff in the chat as well. I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording really quick. Oh, nope, we do not want to end the meeting. We want to end the recording.